Well, good afternoon. My name is Wesley Robertson. I'm a CTAS consultant in Middle Tennessee, and I've got with me Ben Rogers, who is in the Upper Cumberland area. And we're going to talk a little bit about education, MOE, required local match, and how the new TISA or TISA formula, I'm still not sure how we're going to pronounce that, how it affects your MOE or your required local match. We've got about an hour. And if you have questions, please ask us throughout. We'll stop and take those questions. This is not a formal training, so if we don't get through all the slides, but we get to all your questions, that's more important to us than anything. The reason we decided to do this was we started getting phone calls from some county mayors who had talked to their directors of schools, and the first TISA estimates, and TISA is the new K-12 funding formula in Tennessee. It's replacing the BEP starting July 1. They started getting having some conversations with directors of schools, and directors of schools was saying, hey, our required local matches went down. Our required local match is not as much as it was under the BEP. That's a good thing. And I think some mayors and maybe some commissioners that heard that, maybe even some directors of schools that were saying it, maybe thought that could have meant that your local effort to your local school system could be reduced. And that is not the case. And we'll get more into that later. Really, we could end it right now. That's all that needed to be said today is, hey, you've got to maintain what you were already giving. But we thought, hey, let's make this a 1 hour class and let you all ask some questions, and we'll get a little bit more into MOE as well. But first, let's see here. Let's look at what the two TCA laws are that govern education MOE in Tennessee. And we've got two separate laws. And you might ask yourself, well, why do we have these two separate laws? They're kind of saying the same thing. I think 49.3.314 is more directed at the county commission, and it's telling the county commission, hey, you can't supplant total local current operating funds for state funds or vice versa. So that's more directed at the county commission. Hey, you've got a budget, at least what you budgeted the year before, and there's a test, and there's certain revenue line items, which we'll see here shortly. TCA 49.2.203, that's the whole section of the code that applies to school boards. So that's coming back after we've told the commission they can't supplant. Now we're telling the school board, you can't even submit a budget that proposes to supplant. So not only can the county commission not cut schools, even if the school board wanted to accept the cut, this law says, hey, they can't even propose a budget that would allow them to take a cut, even if they wanted to take a cut. So those are the two laws. And let me back up and say, these have been on the books for years. Nothing is changing on these two laws. Nothing changed when TISA went into play. These two laws still stand on the books. You have to maintain effort. Your MOE is going to be exactly the same. End of the class. We can end it right here, right now, but we will not. We will not. So what does MOE for education mean? It basically means budgeted local revenues must be greater than or equal to the prior year budgeted revenues. And that's how the budget ended in the prior year. So if you amended it during the year, you've created a new MOE level. Let's say theoretically, sales tax was booming in your county. You were a growing county, so your school system needed that to go ahead and get that extra money in the budget. They brought an amendment to you during the year, and they amended their revenue up during the year. That's going to be the new MOE level. It's comparing back to the last budget. It's not a one-time pass-fail test.
So what happens if the schools does not actually receive the money, the revenue they budgeted?
That's a very good question. One we get a lot. Ben is asking, hey, what if we budgeted 10 million to the schools, but only 9.5 million came in? And common question we get, and I'm not sure everybody fully understands it on both sides of the debate or argument or issue, I shouldn't say. But it's a budget to budget test. It doesn't really look at what actually comes in. So if 141 does not collect $10 million, it only collects 9.5 million. It's not, there's no obligation that 101 cuts a $500,000 check over to 141 at the end of the year to make the schools whole. Now, we hear that a lot, and I think it's just a misunderstanding that we'll hear from the school side of the argument, or maybe even some county commissioners. Oh, if that 10 million doesn't come in, if it's only 9.5 million, we got to cut a check to the schools at the end of the year. Well, that's wouldn't be the way it would work. There's numerous reasons why that's not the way it works. One is governmental accounting wouldn't let one fund just cut a check to another fund. I mean, that it wouldn't matter what the state law said. So no, that's a good question. Glad you asked that. It is not a one-time pass-fail test. So we get this from commissioners a lot. Hey, what if we pass a budget that's meeting MOE, and then we meet in a couple of months and we amend the school's budget down, their revenue down? That would not satisfy the test. If you did that, you'd be failing your MOE, and the State Department of Education would, I'm assuming they would immediately hold your TISA funding. I was going to say BEP funding, but BEP/TISA funding. Another common question we get or issue we see come up is, hey, what about ADM decreases? Can we reduce MOE if enrollment, average daily membership, in essence, is enrollment in a school system? Enrollment is going down. You can make a per pupil reduction of a school's MOE. That has become a more common issue in Tennessee in the last, I'd say really before COVID, we were really even seeing it, but COVID happened and that threw a wrench into everybody's attendance. But even before COVID, I've got a statistic on here in my notes, 62 of the 95 county school systems had ADM decreases. So if you live in Middle Tennessee, if you're in the greater Nashville area, you're probably, and it's blowing and going here. There's growth, construction, people are moving in here. These suburban counties around Nashville, they're having to build schools every year, multiple schools, some of them. One would think that's going on everywhere in Tennessee, and there wouldn't be county school systems losing enrollment. But in fact, we're not seeing that. A lot of the rural county school systems, 62 of the 95 have had decreases in enrollment. And I think when the census numbers came out a few years ago, it kind of maybe clarified that a little bit. Tennessee did grow, but we didn't grow that much. I think it was 1% statewide, something like that. And if you lived in the greater Nashville area, you'd think, hey, we're one of the top growing states. There is, and we are growing and doing good things, but not as much. If you're out in the rural part of the state, you're probably not seeing what's going on in some of these bigger metropolitan areas. So let's just for a minute look at the MOE test, and I'm not even sure whose test this is that's on the screen. But one thing I wanted to show you all today is anybody on this Zoom, anybody in the state can go out to the Tennessee Department of Education's website and pull up your MOE test. It's a public website. Anybody can get there. You don't have to have any login credentials to get there. And this is the website right up here. It's eplan.tn.gov. And let's just go there. Just for a second. Ben, you got any good stories while I'm trying to navigate here?
No.
You don't?
I can talk about, there you go. We'll talk about that.
Okay. So let's go here. Let's share this. So y'all should be seeing my web page now. So this is the ePlan homepage. And I've got some, and I think Kim is going to send out the materials from the class once the class is over. But one of the items that you'll get is a PDF, and it's the instructions that will walk you through this web page and get you to where we're going to be going. So you go up here to search on the left, you'll see the option organizations, click on organizations. And this is basically just a filter page. There's different ways you can filter down and find your county. Here's some counties I've been looking at. Let's look at, you want to look at Putnam?
Sure.
Let's look at Putnam County. Ben is from Putnam County. Ben is actually a county commissioner in Putnam County. Are you the chairman right now?
I am.
He is actually the chairman of the Putnam County Commission right now. So this, we've searched Putnam County. We see it. It's brought it up right down here. On the far right of the screen, you'll see some options: PT, FA, RR, DI, MI. We'll click on FA. That'll bring this screen up. If we scroll down this screen just a little bit, we should see something that says state funds. So we'll click on state funds, and then we'll begin to see something that looks somewhat familiar. We'll see some funds here, 141, 142, 143. And under 141, we've got maintenance of effort tests. So we'll click on that. And this is Putnam County's maintenance of effort test from last year. Now, we wouldn't see their current year MOE test until their budget got approved and it was submitted to the state. But this is Putnam County's MOE test. And as I said, it's a budget to budget test. So this very first column is the budget they adopted of local revenues that hit the MOE test. And you can see them here. We got property tax and the different revenue line items that go into property tax, sales tax, mixed drink tax, bank excise tax. There are more revenue codes than you see here that are on the test. If you want to know which local revenue codes come into play, we can send you a spreadsheet that shows all of them. The way their website pulls the data, it's only pulling data that's got a number in it. So that's the only numbers we see. There's probably, I don't know, 30 different line items that could be on the test if you're giving it to 141. So we've got property tax here, sales tax. Their total MOE is $37,085,677 and some change. And it's comparing it back to the amended budget from the prior year. So we see here, it's comparing it back to $36,118,000. So y'all, looks like you all gave the schools a little bit more money this current year. And actually you amended their budget up in the middle of the year. Your original budget, it was $34.5 million. I guess they or you all brought a budget amendment and y'all added some revenue. It looks like y'all added property tax in the middle of the year.
Well, I think it was budgeted low and we amended it to where it should have been.
You brought it up.
Yeah. So one thing to notice on this one in Putnam County, you can see the sales tax is an even number. And you're probably thinking, how did that work out? We, in Putnam County, we've always given more than the 50% of sales tax that's required by law to the schools. So back in 2008, 2009, we were giving about 82% of sales tax strictly to the general purpose fund 141. And there was, of course, the economy took a dive and sales tax did not come in as budgeted. So that's why I asked Wesley a minute ago, is it this maintenance of effort, is it budget to actual or budget to budget? Well, the schools wanted it to be budget to actual. And they said, hey, we didn't get our budgeted sales tax. So you owe us, as a county, you owe us this difference. And the counties, I was not a county commissioner then, but I was a CTAS. I was working at CTAS. I started a couple years before that. So I was involved in the process. And I actually said, actually budget to budget. And the schools were like, we still want our money. So the county obliged with a caveat. And the caveat was, we'll give you the difference in sales tax, but that's all you're going to get going forward, because maintenance of effort says all we have to do is budget to budget. And so over the last little bit, I think at that time it was like 15.5 million or maybe 15 million in 2008. So over the last 15 years, we've increased it $2.5 billion in sales tax. So that percentage went from 82%, now it's down to about 60% of sales tax. Well, eventually the county commission is going to have to give more because it's going to be below that 50% threshold as much as our sales tax is growing. But right now, all we're required to do is give that $37,085,000 every year. And that's what we do. And we lock in that sales tax. And of course, we give them the growth in property tax. And I think there's a question we're going to address on that later. But that's how we're structured. Most counties in my area, in the Upper Cumberland area, give that minimum 50% of sales tax, and that allows the growth mechanism for them as well. But the one thing I left out in Putnam County, the excess sales tax we receive goes to our debt service, and about 90% of our current debt is school related. Now that'll change this next fiscal year with adding on to the jail, but 90% of our current debt is school related, and the debt service fund pays that, and that does not come out of the general purpose school fund 141.
So one thing Ben brought up, and just to clarify, there is a law, state law, that says local option sales tax, half will go to education and half goes to the site it was collected. So that's the part unrelated to the two laws we saw earlier. There's a separate law that says that's how sales tax is going to be split up. So schools are going to get half of sales tax, whether it's budgeted or not. It's going to go into their fund 141, unless you set up something similar to what Ben has set up. So theoretically, let's say you paid off your school debt this year and you didn't have any school debt for next year. Y'all probably couldn't get away with putting all that extra money into debt service. I know y'all got school debt, so that's not going to be an issue. But if a county had that same kind of structure and paid off their school debt, they're probably going to have to return and give that money back to 141 if they.
Well, by law they don't, but technically and probably ethically, I mean, let's be honest, I am a county commissioner, but I'm also about doing what's best, and we should probably give more funding to schools if we get that debt paid off, because they need another avenue for growth, revenue growth. Right now, the only revenue growth they have is property tax. So as a county commissioner and chairman of the budget committee, I've been open and spoke about the option of increasing their sales tax percentage in about 2 or 3 years when our debt is paid down quite a bit for schools, and so that may happen.
So a question we had, let's just talk about it now.
Sure.
We've got the test up here. So somewhat controversial topic, and I know there's some school finance folks on here that I saw, so they're probably not going to appreciate this part of the presentation, but we've been asked the question. State law says schools get half of sales tax no matter what. So if let's say Putnam County, we're looking at the numbers here. Let's say half of that sales tax figure for Putnam County is 20 million. And they're well, yeah, let's just throw 20 million out. So Putnam County would budget 20 million in sales tax to their schools, which would be a $2.5 million increase over this $17.5 million figure. And that would be a $2.5 million windfall to the schools if the county didn't come in and also make a $2.5 million reduction to property tax or some other line item on here. So the only number on this test that matters is the bottom line total number. So however you want to move the numbers around to get to 37,085,000 for Putnam County, they can move the numbers around any way they want to. So if theoretically your school system is bringing in a huge amount of sales tax above what they have budgeted, we've had several counties that thought, hey, is this a time for us to look? They're going to get that money regardless because state law says they get it, but we're not budgeting it to them. Would this be a time we think about going ahead and budgeting that sales tax to our schools, and then, hey, our 101 fund or our debt service fund, some other fund in the county highway fund, they're really struggling. We really need some pennies over in one of these other funds. Should we think about taking those pennies out of property tax and moving it to another fund. And that's a decision that a lot of counties have looked at over the last 2 or 3 years. And really, it has a lot to do with what sales tax has done since pre-COVID. It really started with all the Wayfair decision that changed how online sales tax is allocated to cities and counties. Counties saw a huge influx of sales tax, and that's benefited schools' fund balances if it wasn't budgeted to the schools. So that, yes, I think that answers that question. What was the question?
So the question, the earlier question was, does the county have to give growth in property tax?
No, so yeah, hopefully we answered that. Theoretically, no, you do not have to give growth in property tax, although a lot of commissions do. They feel like it's just a fair thing to do. If every other fund's getting some property tax growth, hey, we want to give 141 some property tax growth, but you are not required to do that. That's a local decision.
So we do have a question. I'm looking at Roane County's MOE on sales tax. Why is the budget for Fund 146, which is Transportation Fund, Revenue Code 40210 added to Fund 141's budget?
Good question, and I should have clarified that. This MOE test is the 141 fund, and if you have a transportation fund, it's going to add that revenue in there as well. So some counties have a 144 transportation fund, and it's just a fund where they run the school bus operations or transportation operations. Not many have that, but some do. If you do have that, it's going to add to 141 and be a part of this MOE test. So good question. Again, I've got instructions that'll navigate you straight to this. If you want to look at it later, if you have questions, feel free to give us a call. Let's jump back in here.
We're caught up in questions.
Are we?
Yeah.
Seeing the notes.
Yeah.
Of course you are. Where were we? Right here? Right here?
Yes.
All right, so that was MOE, the MOE test. It's out on E-Plan. Go out there and look at it, study it. If you can't get to it, let one of your field consultant know. We can get it to you. So now let's kind of talk about state funding just for a second. So this is Putnam County's BEP sheet from the current year. This is what we've operated on since 1993, I guess it was. 92 is when the act passed, and 93, I guess, was the first year. So school systems would get these allocation sheets, and this is just this is a summary of what they're getting in funding and the components as to where the funding is. Where's my cursor? So we've got instructional salaries, instructional benefits, classroom, non-classroom, and then we have a total state BEP funding allocation. Putnam County is $61,866,000. So that's what Putnam County got from the state through the BEP in the current year. And then we also have a local match requirement. So $31,232,000. So if you all will remember back to that MOE test, it was 37.5-ish. So Putnam County's meeting their required local match. They've got to put in 31 million. They're putting in 37 million. So they're good there. And their total allocation of BEP is 93 million. So that's BEP.
Is the BEP allocation on the E-Plan website?
It is not that I'm aware of. Now, we used to get these from the department every year. We haven't gotten our hands on the TISA or TISA ones yet. We used to get these, and if you requested one, we could get it out to you. If you're wanting to see your TISA or TISA ones, hopefully we'll get them soon. But if not, I'd reach out to my school system. I know they've got their first April estimate back at the end of April, I believe it was, and the May estimate was due to go out toward the end of May. It may already be out. Some of the school folks on here maybe could tell us if they've gotten their May estimate. I think it's out. But for you new folks, some of you, this is gonna feel like a repeat. The state, typically, the State Department of Education would send a funding estimate out in April. They would send one out in May, send an estimate out in June, and then the final allocation figure would come out early July. And they're gonna keep that same pattern or schedule for TISA estimates, is my understanding. I think I jumped ahead of myself. I think we've got a slide on that later. So that was the BEP sheet. This is Putnam County's April estimate for TISA.
May estimate went out Friday, they just told us.
Okay, so
Thank you.
May estimates out there. If you don't have that from your school system, I would encourage you to get that. This is what it's going to look like. I'm not going to go into the TISA calculations at all, but I just want to point out a few things on these sheets. If you get them and you're on the county side or the school side, if you haven't heard this already, I have a feeling you all have heard this. So this is the TISA calculation page, and I see this, and it's got the base, it's got the weights in here, some direct appropriations down here at the bottom. And this one pager replaces that 5-page sheet that we used to get with that summary page on the BEP. There was 5 other pages that went into the calculation. Those 5 pages are now replaced with this one page. So it is a much simpler calculation, easier to follow. And down here at the bottom, it's got Putnam County 102,856,000. So if you see that initially, you might think, oh, shucks, we went from 61 million to 102 million. Well, this 102 million includes your local match, which we'll see on the next page. So don't let that fool you. You hadn't had that. You hadn't been helped that much by TISA. So this is the page, 102 million. You remember back here, well, let's jump back. Their total funding was 93 million on the BEP. So they have seen a bit of an increase, about a $10 million increase in total.
Yeah, what's interesting though, back last year, we were told it would be a $14 million increase. And the latest numbers we got, I believe, was around 12 million, but that's not working out right here. So I'm not sure. We're still missing some. I think we're still missing some numbers. Maybe we're waiting on.
I think that's a different class.
Yeah,
for
it
a
is.
different day.
It is. I'm sorry.
So this page, which is another page, I would, if you're on the county side, I would ask for this page and that previous page from your school system so you can kind of see the full picture. This is where it breaks down that 102 million into the state portion, into the local portion. So up here, these top rows are some statewide total figures. And this is actually going into the calculation of how they're calculating how much Putnam County needs to contribute. So statewide total, it's 6.6 billion in the base of statewide total funding. TISA is split 70-30. The state's going to put in 70%. They want the locals to put in 30%. So they say, hey, 30% of 6.6 billion, this 1.9 billion figures, total statewide, we expect locals to put in 1.9 billion in local funding. Then we move down the page, we see the 1.9 billion repeated, and we see something called fiscal capacity. So this is the calculation that informs the local government as to how much you're going to be expected to put in to the local match. And Putnam County's is 1.14%. And if you see that on the surface, you're like, that does not mean anything to me. What does that mean? 1.14%. There are 95 of these numbers, 95 of these calculations, statewide, one per county, 95 counties, there's 95 percentages. If we add all of those up, they add up to 100%. So there's two statistical economic groups that do these calculations, and we'll see this in a later slide. TASSER and CIBER. CIBER's out of the University of Tennessee. TASSER's a state agency. They do lots of statistical and economic research, and one of the things that both of these groups do is calculate fiscal capacity for each county. And it's determining the wealth of that county based on your tax bases. So the value of your property and your gross sales, and again, I'm getting ahead of myself, it's on the next slide, but Putnam County's is 1.14%. We multiply that times the 1.9 billion, and we come up with 22.5 million is what we're expecting Putnam County to put in to education. So we think back to that BEP sheet, it was 31 million. Under the BEP, they had their required local match was 31 million. It's dropped to 22.5 million, which means absolutely nothing because their MOE is 37 million. So once you exceed your required local match in the BEP, that required local match really means nothing because you have to maintain that new higher level, that MOE amount. We got a question.
Is fiscal capacity affected by the property assessment year cycle? So,
yes and no. It's based on the value of your property. So it's a 3-year rolling average. So yes, we're not all on the same cycle, but that should smooth itself out in their formulas. So yeah, I mean, yes, it would be, but I think all that would be smoothed out over time. So, and the sheet here at the bottom, last thing I'll point out is 37 million. They're showing the MOE amount. So there are a couple of, there's a base calculation on the left side of this page, and there's a weights calculation on the right side. Those are the two different parts of TISA. We add those two local matches together. We see the 22.5, the 5.7, and we get 28 million is what Putnam County's required local match is. And we see down here at the bottom, they're contributing 37 million. One other thing I want to show you. If you're a county that has multiple school systems, the middle part of this page is going to split out the required local match for a school system that this page is attributed to. And if you're not familiar with what that is, we have counties in the state that have city school systems and or special school districts. Fiscal capacity is only calculated at the county level. So that figure is applied countywide, and then they have to go in and further split up that required local match amongst the school systems in that county. This middle part of the page right here is doing that calculation if you're one of those counties. And I won't go into what that is, but if you're confused about that or don't understand that, feel free to reach out to us and we can talk through it. But that's what this middle calculation is doing. This is actually Crockett counties, and they have Alamo and Bell. So this calculation is doing that for them. Do we want to talk about fiscal capacity a little bit? So back to the 1.14 figure for Putnam County. Let's look at, it's not going to let me open that file. So let's do this. Let's end this. You got any good stories you want to tell?
I can tell something about you.
Well, I don't know if we want. I've got it coming up here now.
Okay, good.
So just I think that if you visually see this, it might help you understand fiscal capacity a little bit better. These are the fiscal capacity indexes for the full state, all 95 counties. Anderson County, this is alphabetical. Anderson County is 1.09%. They're 1.09% of the full state's fiscal capacity. So obviously the big boys, the big four, are going to take up a big portion of that. Davidson County, 17%. Hamilton County's 5.9%. Knox County, 7.8%. What was Putnam County? 1.1. So Montgomery's 2.6. Putnam, here's the 1.16. Actually, we had 1.14. So this is an older sheet. They update this calculation every so often. Let's look at a small. What's your smallest county? Pickett. Pickett, you see here, Pickett is only 0.04% of fiscal capacity. So what is this going to mean? What this is going to mean is Putnam or Pickett, I don't know how close Putnam's going to be to the median. Pickett's required local match is not, it's probably going to be more like 10% or 5% instead of that 30%. That's what this figure, this calculation is doing. It's applying what they think your county's wealth is and your county's ability to fund education is, and moving that 30% required local match either up or down. An extremely wealthy state or county would be like a Davidson County, even a Sevier County per capita is going to rank really high up there because the value of their property and the value of their gross sales is going to per capita be really high.
So it's more than this population.
Yeah, it's not, it really doesn't have a lot to do with population. It's more about the values of your property. So let's jump back in here to the PowerPoint. Okay. So, and these two, I forgot we had these two slides in here. They kind of go through it a little bit. You might ask yourself, well, why do we have these two entities that calculate fiscal capacity? Historically, this has been the political argument in K-12 funding. It's not been the model, the BEP versus the TISA. That's really not been the argument. And I don't know that it really was this time around. I think some folks felt like TISA was going to move us toward vouchers, and that's been an administrative push. But we already had some form of vouchers anyway, and we just took a per pupil number of the BEP. So I don't know that was really as big a part of it. Fiscal capacity is where the rubber met the road and where the politicking began in K-12 funding, but it wasn't a part of it this time. And the reason being is, in K-12 funding, if you'll think of a pie, there's 95 pieces of that pie, and we divvy up the size of those pieces of the pie based on your fiscal capacity. When you start dabbling with fiscal capacity, that means my piece of the pie is going to get a little smaller or a little bigger, and we have winners and losers. And the only way to cover up the winners and losers when the proportion of the size of the piece gets smaller is just to make the pie bigger altogether. And that's typically what we have seen is when we make some kind of substantial change to K-12 funding, we have to make the pie bigger to kind of hide who the winners and losers are. And they're pumping in what, $1 billion, I think $1 billion new dollars into K-12 funding. So TASSER, the two I've highlighted are the two that are also in CIBER, and we've got equalized property assessment. Basically, that's the value of your property, and then I've highlighted taxable sales because that's your gross sales. So it's not how you tax your property or how you tax your sales local. It's the gross sales and the value of your property. We often hear, hey, if we raise taxes locally, that's going to hurt or help our fiscal capacity. We don't want to do that. Or if we cut taxes, that has nothing to do with it. It's the value of your property and your total sales. The other one that I'll point out with TASSER, which is what many folks believe makes the big difference between the two, is per capita income is a piece to the TASSER model. And that naturally is probably going to help more rural counties and hurt your urban and suburban counties. And that's what happens. This TASSER model tends to favor a rural county because some things in here help make them look less wealthy. In these two models, you want to look as poor as you can so that you get more state dollars. That's the whole game on fiscal capacities. You want to look as poor as you can so you get more state dollars. So the next slide here is the CIBER model. And this one only came into existence in 07, 08 when we had BEP 2.0 came into play. We got a question.
The total property value will increase funds in MOE question mark. Am I understanding the fiscal capacity adjustment?
Yeah, so if the value of your property proportionately went up compared to the rest of the state, yeah, you would look wealthier. So therefore, it would mean you get less state revenue. But we're all being compared to each other, so you would have to go up more than everybody else.
And the county contribution goes up.
It could, yeah, it could mean your local.
Percentage is gonna go up.
Yeah, your local match could go up. So if we think back to some of those local match calculations, Putnam County's number in that was 1.14%. If it went up to 1.2, that's going to mean Putnam County's going to have to kick in more money.
Right.
So the CIBER model came into play with BEP 2.0, which was in 07, 08, and it's only going to look at property and sales. And this was developed by Dr. Bill Fox out of the University of Tennessee. And Dr. Fox's point that he would make as to why we should use this model and not the TASSER model was, he said, hey, these are the two main sales or revenue streams that local governments use. We shouldn't look at income which TASSER used, because we don't have an income tax in Tennessee. So there's no point in using that in the calculation. So his argument was, let's just use these two. The goal was to go to this model. But in 07, 08, it was right before we moved into a recession. The state didn't have enough. I talked about how the state, whenever there's a big change to K-12 funding, they have to pump in a lot of new money to kind of hide the winners and the losers. We moved right into a recession in 08, 09. The state didn't have the money to fully fund BEP 2.0. So that first year they used 50% TASSER and 50% CIBER, and it got froze at this level because the small schools, the rural schools figured out, hey, we're better off if we stay with TASSER. And they started threatening lawsuits to force the state not to move to this new model, which was favoring suburban and urban counties. I'm giving y'all a little bit of inside baseball here, but I want you to kind of understand what's going on behind the scenes when this stuff's happening. So now we're at 50% TASSER, 50% CIBER. It stayed there for several years. And the state, through the appropriations bill, said that's what we were going to use. And then under the Haslam administration, they just said, hey, let's just go ahead and put this in law that it's going to be 50% this and 50% that. So that became the law that we're going to be at this for the foreseeable future. This did not change at all. TISA, it has no impact on this. These are going to work just like they did pre-TISA, post-TISA. It's all going to work the same, but that's fiscal capacity. That was a quick overview of fiscal capacity. If you want to know more, understand more, feel free to reach out. It can get real technical and in the weeds if we get to looking at the formulas too much. So moving on from fiscal capacity, one last piece we wanted to just make you aware of are teacher salary minimums. So the State Board of Education, which is a separate entity from the State Department of Education, every year adopts state minimum salary schedules for teachers. And if you're familiar with those schedules at all, you know how they used to be. They would have multiple columns, and every year a teacher taught, they would get another step on that schedule. So the first column would be if they have a bachelor's degree and 0 years of experience. And then the next column might be a master's degree, and there's other degrees in between those. Then maybe an EDS and a PhD. And then the rows would be a year of experience. and the teacher would gain a year of experience or get another degree, and that would mean more money. The state modified that schedule. Oh, it's probably been over 5 years ago. They condensed a lot of those lanes or rows, and now a teacher might only see that step every 5 years. And now they used to say, hey, we're going to increase the minimum state salary, the teacher salary schedule across the board 5%. And now they really focus on this entry level teacher. So that teacher with a bachelor's degree and 0 years of experience. In fact, they've just this year passed a law that set out, this is our plan for increasing that minimum salary schedule through 2027. In 2020, 22, 23, the current year, it went to 40,000. Next year, it's going to go to 42.5. That's a 6.25% increase. The next year, it's going to go to 44. The next year, 47. The next year, 50. So and the state is saying, hey, TISA will have enough money in it to cover these raises, and I believe them. I think there's going to be plenty of money in the formula to cover these raises. But for whatever reason, if the funding was not there, you know, it's something that you need to be aware of as a county is, hey, you might be on the hook. Theoretically, you could be for some of these raises. They're telling us you should be covered. I think you'll be covered. But we'll see. I think this year everybody was covered. I think in the next two or 3 years, the way the fiscal note was written at the state, if the state put in no more money to TISA, which we know that's not going to happen, they've committed to put much more money in it than what they have. I think there were 3 or 4 counties next year that would have to increase their local effort to education, and then by the last year, I think it was like 8 counties, but that's if the state were to not put any more money. And we have no reason to believe that would happen.
So we have a question about the previous question. If property value increased, does the MOE increase? MOE is based on your budget. So when we say the property value increases, that means the fiscal capacity is going to increase. Now, property value could increase in your county and through reappraisal, and the county could increase that certified rate, which would most likely give the schools more money. But your question is directly related to is if property value increases, does MOE have to increase? No, MOE only increases if the county commission budgets an increase in MOE.
Yeah.
Next one, do you think the county will apply COLA on top of these increases? I have an opinion, but what's your opinion?
That's a purely local decision. So the school board and then the county commission will decide how much is going to be added on top of what the state's given them. As long as you're meeting those minimum numbers, that's all the state's going to be looking at. So just back to that previous question, if this, and I've moved back to a few slides and I don't want to confuse you all. This local required match from Putnam County is $28.3 million. And they're putting in 37 million on their MOE. If this 28 million became 39 million, then that would trigger Putnam County having to put in more local money, but not until that 28 million catches up to 37 million would Putnam County have to put in more money. And I'll say this, 99% of the counties in the state are just like Putnam County. They're putting in way more than they're required to through these funding formulas to fund education. So it would take a huge amount of money for this formula to grow to the point where most counties are going to have to kick in new money. Got another question?
No, we're good.
So we're getting to the end here. And I've already talked about this a little bit. Timeline for TISA. I've put the same timeline as the BEP, and what I've heard from the department is it's going to be exactly the same. But this all will begin And I've got November on here is when the governor does his informal budget hearings with departments. But really, I can tell you from experience, the state Department of Ed is going to start working on the next year estimate, probably September, October. They're going to start trying to work up the new estimate for the next year's budget by then. I mean, you've just gotten your new number and they're already working on next year's number, but the governor will present his state of the state. He'll do his state of the state in January or early February. That's when he lays out his budget. That's when we'll know what the plan is for TISA. And then the department will get out an April estimate, a May estimate, a June estimate, and a July final number. And that's kind of how it'll flow. I would say for the most part, your April, May, and June estimates are probably going to be close enough and good enough to budget from. In a normal year, this is the first year of TISA. You might want to wait till you get a few estimates just to be sure. The only time I feel like if I were in your shoes, I would want to kind of wait, just make sure as if we're going through a big change in the funding formula, which we're doing this year. So I don't think you're wrong and maybe just, being a little bit more patient. But in a normal year, I would say next year and the next year, those April numbers, those May numbers should be pretty close. Now, this is all driven by your enrollment. So if the enrollment figures your school system is submitting were to change drastically for whatever reason, that's going to change your estimate. So if that happens, everybody needs to be on the same page and be aware of that. Got a question?
So speaking of enrollment, while decreases can take place from reduction in ADM, what happens or how does funding work if you have an increase in students? Are you required to fund more than the MOE then?
So I'm going to jump back again. If we jump back to this Putnam County page where it calculates their local match of the 28.3 million, if their enrollment starts growing every year, this 28 becomes 30, then it becomes 32, then the next year it becomes 34. They don't have to put in more money until this 28 million calculation exceeds this 37 million calculation. So that's what I was saying earlier. It would take a lot of new money in the funding formula to generate most counties having to kick in more money. Now, there are some counties where this 28.3 million is all they're given. They're only given 28.3 million. So every year they're having to kick in a little bit of new money because they're just barely putting in the required local match.
Next question, go back to the salary schedule. We received our state salary schedule for licensed instructional personnel earlier this week. I'm seeing a minimum salary for bachelor's and 0 years of experience at $42,000. Am I reading something incorrect?
I thought it was 42.5, but now you're making me question if I've got the wrong figure up here. I'm fairly confident in the bill it's 42.5, but we can double check that. So that's what you got from the State Board of Education. Or is that your
state salary schedule for licensed instructional personnel?
Okay, we'll double check that. So the last slide I have is the county budget calendar. And we've had several discussions on this budget calendar since it came into play probably 5 years ago. And ratio studies and reappraisals and property values in Tennessee and what they've done to this schedule and people trying to get a budget passed. But also we throw into that TISA or TISA. And, hey, we're not sure what our TISA number is going to be. So the Comptroller's Office Division of Local Government Finance wants you to get your budget done by June 30th. And you should try to do that if you can. I sound like I'm setting us up to say, hey, it's okay not to do that. The law requires us to have a budget by June 30th. Theoretically, if we don't have a budget in place, we don't have any authority to spend. But they did add a provision into this law that gives everybody an automatic 2-month continuation budget. So before this law went in on the books, you're probably familiar, if you've been around for a little while, round about June, if it didn't look like you were going to get your budget approved, there was a rush at that June commission meeting to get a continuing resolution passed. So you'd pass a continuing resolution, and that would get you by until you got your budget approved. There's no need to do those resolutions now. There's a state law that gives you an automatic 2-month. There is no 3rd month unless you appeal to the state and they grant you one, and they're not granting these they've only ever granted one of those. Was that Roane County, and they had a new assessor that didn't know what they were doing, not there now. And they had to come in and help them get the reappraisal done. But as far as getting your budget done, if you feel like you need to be a little more patient this year, you have that ability. Local comptrollers, local government finance is really going to want you to get it done by June 30th. You got any strong feelings one way or the other on that? You want to make them mad at you?
I do have feelings, but I'll keep them. I'll just say this. I have a county that yesterday sent me, they just got their certified rate for reappraisal. It's a very small county. They highly rely on property tax, and they just got their certified rate. So they basically have 30 days to get a budget passed based on their certified rate. So
you could get it done and working off some estimates, but you might have to come back in a month or two and make some budget.
Well, the issue
changes.
is that this small county has some commercial property that goes through the appeals process, Board of Equalization. And Board of Equalization decides to lower those assessments, then that affects their property tax revenue. And that's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Try to get it done by June 30th if you can. If you can't, you do have state law grants you that 2-month continuation. So I just want you aware of that as well.
So did I hear you correctly in saying that we do not have to do a continuing budget resolution anymore? That is correct.
That's correct. And if you're still doing those, then you don't need to be doing them. You're wasting your time. It doesn't mean anything. State law gives you an automatic 2 months and you're covered.
They'll check in with you to see where you're at in your budget process in June. You can notify them and say, hey, we're not going to pass a budget in June. It's probably going to be July, and could be 1st of August, but they'll find a way to communicate with you.
And that's all we've got. We've been on for about an hour. Any other questions?